The Lone Rider and the Frozen Heart. Dusty Rivers squinted at the horizon, a serrated edge of sun-scorched cliffs that ridiculed the unbroken expanse around him. Another day, another parched waltz with the wilderness. Patches, his sway-backed Appaloosa, trudged onward, exhibiting the stoic weariness of one intimately acquainted with stinging grit and lonely burdens. Since dawn, Dusty had held his tongue, and he intended to keep doing so. Words were like well springs in this desolation, precious and swiftly depleted. A weather-beaten hand traced the contours of his saddle's horn, its leather etched with cracks and faded like old yearnings he'd rather avoid. They whispered unwelcome echoes of mirth and warmth, a life stolen by cruel fate. The silence was preferable, the rhythmic squeak of saddle leather, the soft expulsion of air from Patch's nostrils. Honesty resided there, dependability. No false promises. Dusty's gaze roamed the vista, instinctively noting the meager plant life, minute shifts in the breeze, the circling raptors aloft, ever watchful. He was a creature of habit, his existence a measured cycle of riding, pitching camp, a meager supper of dried meat and beans, and slumber beneath a canopy of stars, vast yet claustrophobically near. He existed as a phantom, adrift through the desert as a dislodged thistle. A sudden stop from Patches jarred him alert. The horse danced nervously, ears flicking, a soft nicker rising in its chest. Dusty frowned, hand instinctively drifting towards the Winchester strapped to his mount. Patches seldom startled easily. Following the horse's line of sight, about 100 yards ahead, wavering in the intense light, resided something jarringly out of place. A block of ice. A flawless, crystalline cube sitting incongruously amid the arid soil and thorny brush. Dusty's brow furrowed further. Ice. In this forsaken emptiness? It had to be a mirage, a taunting trick of the light meant to torment a parched soul. He dismounted, his boots sinking slightly into the loose sand. "Easy there, boy," he murmured to Patches, still tense, eyes wide and alert. He secured the reins to a spindly bush and moved toward the oddity, rifle held loosely but ready. Approaching, the shimmering intensified. It wasn't illusory. It was solid. The ice was immaculately clear, refracting sunlight into a dazzling prism, and surprisingly large, nearly 4 feet on a side. Cautiously, Dusty circled it, senses heightened. No sign marked its arrival, no tracks marred the sand, no clue to its origin. It seemed to have simply materialized. He extended a gloved hand, touching the surface. Coldness, bone-chilling, surged through him. He recoiled, surprised by the intensity. This was no ordinary ice. It thrummed with an unusual energy, a muted vibration that resonated in the air. He peered into the block, seeking an explanation. The ice was pristine, devoid of bubble or blemish. But as he gazed deeper, a presence manifested within. A form, vague, indistinct, yet undeniably there. Dusty's mind raced. What was this thing? A quirk of nature? Or something else? Unease washed over him. Mysteries were unwelcome. They churned up dormant emotions he preferred undisturbed. He should simply remount Patches and ride away. Pretend it never existed. But he couldn't. He couldn't dismiss the sense that this strange block held significance. Something he couldn't ignore. Perhaps the sheer improbability of it. A blatant affront to the desert's unforgiving nature. Or the nagging inquisitiveness he struggled to subdue. He glanced at Patches, still regarding him with concern. The horse seemed to perceive his inner struggle. Dusty sighed. Abandoning it was impossible. He had to investigate. He holstered his rifle and drew his knife, a time-worn Bowie since childhood. Kneeling beside the ice, breath fogging in the frigid air. He hesitated, then struck the surface with the blade. Steel rang sharply against the ice, the sound echoing across the silent expanse. The ice remained untouched, unmarked, as if striking solid stone. Dusty grunted, frustrated. This would be more challenging than expected. His hand traced the ice's perimeter, searching for weakness, a fault. Nothing. The ice presented perfect, unyielding resistance. He considered options. Breaking it with a rock risked damaging the contents. Melting proved impossible with his limited water. He glanced up at the sun, its harsh glare relentless. He had time, at least. He would wait. He would observe. He would unravel the secrets hidden within this strange block. He settled beside it, hat shading his eyes. Patches nudged his shoulder, a wordless offer of companionship. Dusty scratched the horse's ears, a small gesture of gratitude. Not entirely alone, not yet. And as the sun began its slow descent, casting long, distorted silhouettes across the dunes, Dusty Rivers knew his solitary path had veered into unforeseen territory. An icy enigma. The sun beat down, mocking Dusty's efforts. He circled the ice block, the enormity of it still unsettling. Patches, his scruffy mutt, whined and pawed at his leg, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. "Easy, boy," Dusty murmured, more to reassure himself than the dog. "Just trying to figure this thing out." He returned to his task, the rhythmic thwack of his pickaxe echoing in the stillness. Smaller shards of ice flew with each strike, glittering like scattered diamonds before melting into nothing on the parched earth. He focused on one corner, working with painstaking care. He didn't want to damage whatever, or whoever, was inside. Hours bled together. The sun climbed higher, then began its slow descent. Dusty's muscles screamed in protest, his hands raw and blistered. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm him, the ice gave way. A large chunk broke off, revealing a face. A woman's face. He stared, mesmerized. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the fading light, her features delicate and serene. Long lashes rested on her cheeks. He touched the ice that encased her face, the cold biting his fingers. It was like touching a dream. He chipped away with renewed urgency, driven by a force he didn't understand. Piece by piece, he freed her head and shoulders. Her dark hair, frozen solid, fanned out around her like a halo. "Patches," he said, his voice hoarse. "Help me get her out." The dog seemed to understand. He nudged the ice with his nose, then whined again, his tail tucked between his legs. Together, they managed to dislodge the remaining ice, freeing the woman from her icy prison. She was surprisingly light. Dusty cradled her in his arms, his heart pounding against his ribs. He'd carried injured calves before, but this was different. This felt sacred. The journey back to his cabin was arduous. The desert floor was uneven, and the setting sun cast long, distorted shadows that played tricks on his eyes. Patches trotted alongside him, occasionally glancing up as if to check on their fragile cargo. Each step was a battle against exhaustion and doubt. What was he doing? He should have left her there. He was a loner, a ghost. He had no business getting involved in something like this. But he couldn't leave her. He knew that now. Finally, the cabin came into view, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. He kicked the door open and stumbled inside, gently laying the woman on his cot. The cabin was small, only one room, sparsely furnished with a rough-hewn table, a couple of chairs, and a wood-burning stove. He quickly started a fire, the flames licking hungrily at the dry wood. The warmth began to chase away the chill that had settled in his bones. He found a stack of old blankets and carefully wrapped them around the woman. Her skin was cold to the touch, like marble. He knelt beside her, his gaze tracing the lines of her face. Who was she? Where did she come from? And how did she end up frozen in the middle of the desert? He dipped a cloth in lukewarm water and gently dabbed at her face, removing the last traces of ice. Her eyelashes fluttered, and he held his breath. He watched her chest rise and fall very slightly. Alive. She was alive. He stoked a fire, adding more wood. The cabin grew warmer, the air thick with the scent of burning cedar. He sat beside her, Patches resting his head on his knee, and waited. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for, but he knew he couldn't leave her side. The icy enigma was slowly thawing, and he was determined to be there when she awoke. Awakening. A shiver rippled beneath Crystal's paper-thin eyelids. Beside the cot, Dusty, ever vigilant, almost missed the subtle stir. He'd coaxed the fire to a gentle blaze, the crackling logs a stark counterpoint to the profound silence that had long been his only companion. He edged closer, holding his breath. Her lashes danced again, longer now, inky arcs against her pallid face. Then, a sigh like the rustle of dried leaves, and her eyes fluttered open. The color of a pre-dawn sky in winter, a washed-out, uncertain blue. They blinked, slow and vacant, registering nothing. Dusty's throat tightened. This was it. The instant he'd both yearned for and dreaded. Bewilderment clouded her gaze. She attempted to sit, but her limbs felt weighted, inert. A soft murmur escaped her. "Where?" she croaked, her voice a dry rasp. Dusty moved closer, his worn boots soundless on the planks. "Take it easy," he rumbled, his voice rusty from lack of use. "You're safe. You're in my cabin." Recognition flickered in her eyes, widening slightly. He saw a spark of fear, quickly veiled by an attempt at control. "Cabin," she echoed, a crease forming between her brows. She pushed herself up further, bracing on her elbows. The blanket slipped, revealing a simple gown he'd procured, still much too large for her slender frame. "Yes," Dusty affirmed, his voice calm. "I found you, out in the desert." He paused, uncertain how much to divulge. Frozen solid. The words hung heavy in the air. Crystal's gaze swept the small space, taking in the roughly hewn timber walls, the sparse appointments, the inviting hearth. "Frozen?" she whispered, her voice faint. She lifted a hand, touching her cheek gingerly, as if testing for lingering ice. Panic began to constrict her features. I don't understand. I don't remember." She squeezed her eyes shut, seeking a memory, a spark of awareness. But there was only emptiness, a vast and silent void. Dusty watched, his heart aching with a newfound tenderness. He knelt by the bedside, laying a gentle hand on her arm. Her skin still held a wintry chill. "It's okay," he murmured. "Don't force it. Just rest." Her eyes opened again, searching his. "Who are you?" "Dusty," he answered. "Dusty Rivers." "Dusty," she echoed, the name tentative on her tongue. It sounded alien, unfamiliar. "And I am." He hesitated once more. He knew nothing of her. He didn't even possess her name. "I don't know," he confessed. "You haven't told me." Tears glistened in her eyes, blurring her already disoriented vision. "I don't know either." Dusty rose, stepping back to grant her space. He approached the small table and poured water from a pitcher he'd placed there earlier. "Here," he offered, extending the cup. "Drink this. It'll help." She took the cup with trembling hands, her gaze fixed on him. She sipped slowly, the water easing her parched throat. Finishing, she returned the cup. "Thank you." "You're welcome," he replied, setting it down. "Are you hungry? I have some stew." She pondered this for a moment, a furrow deepening in her brow. "I think so," she responded finally. "Yes, I am hungry." Dusty spooned stew into a bowl and brought it to her, along with a utensil. The fragrance of simmering vegetables and meat permeated the cabin, a welcome aroma battling her apprehension. He observed her as she ate, her movements wary at first, then more assured as warmth bloomed within her. "This is good," she murmured after several bites. A ghost of a smile touched her mouth. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Dusty repeated, experiencing a strange satisfaction. He'd been alone so long, catering only to his own needs. This simple act of care felt transformative. As she ate, her gaze continued its restless circuit of the room, seeking a clue, a trigger. Her attention snagged on the small, framed photograph on the mantel, a faded image of Dusty as a younger man, standing beside a woman with sparkling eyes. "Who's that?" she inquired, gesturing toward the photograph. Dusty tensed, his brief smile extinguished. "That was my wife," he said, his voice leveled. "She's gone now." Sympathy softened Crystal's expression. "I'm sorry," she offered. "I didn't mean to intrude." "It's all right," Dusty replied, turning away. "It was a lifetime ago." He fussed with the fire, adding another log. Silence descended again, thicker this time, imbued with unspoken grief and unanswered questions. Crystal finished her stew, the warmth gradually melting the last vestiges of the chill clinging to her soul. She looked at Dusty, his back to her, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that transcended physical fatigue. She perceived, with an inexplicable certainty, that they were fellow wanderers, lost in a world that had moved on without them. And somehow, miraculously, they had converged. Whispers of the past. The aroma of pine and wood smoke usually soothed Dusty's soul, but today it was tainted by Crystal's palpable anxiety. Huddled by the hearth, she nursed a tepid mug of tea, a troubled crease etched between her brows. He feigned attention to a torn saddle blanket across the room, yet his gaze remained fixed on her every move. A sudden intake of breath, a white-knuckled grip on the mug, shattered the silence. Tea splashed on her hand. "A tower," she breathed, her voice a fragile tremor. Lofty, alabaster engulfed in flames. Instantly, Dusty knelt beside her. "Crystal? What's wrong? Are you all right?" Her eyes, wide and distant, seemed to look inward. "The cold, it's returning. Ice. No, the fire." A soft whimper escaped her as she squeezed her eyes shut. He gently relieved her of the mug, placing it on the stone hearth. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice a calming anchor. He enclosed her trembling hand in his own, finding her skin frigid despite the nearby blaze. "You're safe here, Crystal. There's no fire, just us." Her breath hitched, her eyelids fluttering. Disorientation clouded her gaze as she met his eyes. "Dusty? What happened?" "You had a moment," he responded carefully. "A memory, perhaps." She frowned, massaging her temples. It was fractured, like looking through broken glass. A tower, burning, and a dreadful chill. It frightened me deeply. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "It's all right to be scared. Sounds like you've been through something truly harrowing." He longed to delve deeper, to decipher the visions that plagued her, but resisted the urge to pry, to force revelations she wasn't prepared for. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice regaining a measure of strength, "for being here with me." He offered a simple nod, releasing her hand. Returning to the saddle blanket, he felt the silence stretch, thick with unspoken queries. Later, while Crystal slept soundly in the guest room, Dusty found himself drawn to the ice block he'd stowed in the root cellar. He'd avoided the place since hauling it in, his stomach churning at the thought. Now, however, an inexplicable pull tugged at him. Grabbing a lantern, he descended the rough-hewn steps. The cellar air, damp and biting, offered a sharp contrast to the cabin's warmth. The ice block, a shimmering obelisk, dominated the corner in the lantern's glow. He circled it slowly, his gaze sweeping its crystalline surface. He could still discern her form trapped within, though the image seemed to grow fainter with each passing day. The longer Crystal remained away from the ice, the less distinct she appeared. Kneeling, he brought the lantern closer. He spied something previously unseen, a subtle iridescence deep within the ice, like dust motes dancing in a sunbeam. Drawing nearer, his breath fogging in the frigid air, he watched the shimmer coalesce into minuscule, intricate patterns, almost like runes. He ran a gloved hand over the slick surface, the numbing cold penetrating the leather. Runes? What could it signify? This was more than some bizarre quirk of nature. This was something else entirely. Back in the cabin, Dusty poured a shot of whiskey, the amber liquid searing its way down his throat. He fixed his gaze on the embers of the dying fire, the ghostly runes swirling in his thoughts. He was a plain man, a rancher. He knew cattle, horses, the turning of the seasons. Magic runes, infernos consuming towers, those belonged in tales, not in the realm of the real. Yet, here he stood, sheltering a woman liberated from a prison of ice, a woman haunted by visions of towers and flames. A woman who, despite everything, possessed a gentle compassion that was slowly eroding the icy barriers around his heart. He thought of her smile, the cheerful wrinkles around her eyes when she laughed. He remembered the tenderness with which she'd cared for an injured sparrow, her touch both delicate and certain. He recalled stories she'd related about the animals she had rescued. He hadn't felt this vulnerable in years. Not since Mary. But Mary was gone, felled by a fever that had swept through the valley. He'd grieved, buried her, and erected a fortress of solitude. Now, Crystal had arrived, a bright ember in the desolate landscape of his life. He was drawn to her light, to her resilience, but also gripped by fear. Fear of losing her, fear of enduring that kind of pain again. He swallowed another mouthful of whiskey, the warmth failing to dispel the deep chill in his bones. He needed answers. He needed to discern who Crystal was, her origins, and the nature of the events that had befallen her. And he had to do it before the echoes of her past devoured them both. The storm and the outlaws. The wind howled like a banshee, clawing at the cabin walls. Snow, thick as cotton batting, plastered against the windows, blurring the world into a swirling white chaos. Dusty stoked the fire, the flames leaping high, casting flickering shadows that danced with the storm's fury. Crystal sat huddled near the hearth, sketching in her notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. The blizzard had descended with startling speed, trapping them in its icy grip. Suddenly, a series of frantic bangs echoed against the cabin door, punctuated by shouts swallowed by the wind. Dusty grabbed his rifle, his senses on high alert. "Stay back," he told Crystal, his voice tight. He crept towards the door, peering through a crack in the wooden frame. A group of figures, cloaked in snow and desperation, stood huddled on the porch. He recognized the leader instantly. Black Bart, a notorious outlaw, with a reputation as cold and brutal as the storm itself. Dusty hesitated. Opening the door to Black Bart was an invitation to trouble, but leaving them to die in the blizzard felt like a betrayal of his own code, however fractured it might be. With a sigh, he unbolted the door, bracing himself. Black Bart shoved the door open further, a gust of icy wind blasting into the cabin. He and 3 other men, faces grim and frostbitten, stumbled inside, shaking off the snow like mangy wolves. Bart's eyes, hard and glinting, scanned the room, taking in every detail. Well, Bart drawled, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Looks like we found ourselves a cozy little haven." His gaze lingered on Crystal, his expression shifting from predatory to something else. "Recognition?" "Rivers," Bart acknowledged, nodding curtly. "Didn't expect to find you so far out." "And who's the company?" Dusty kept his rifle trained loosely at his side, his eyes never leaving Bart. "She's a friend." Bart chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "A friend, huh? She looks familiar." He took a step closer to Crystal, who instinctively shrank back. "Those eyes, that hair, it can't be." He stopped abruptly, his eyes widening in disbelief. He pointed a gloved finger at Crystal, his voice laced with a mixture of awe and fear. "It's her. It's the Ice Queen, the Frost Witch. I thought the legends were just stories." Crystal looked at Bart, confused and frightened. "Ice Queen? I don't understand." Bart ignored her, his gaze fixed on Dusty. "You fool. You have no idea what you've stumbled upon. She's not just some damsel in distress. She's a sorceress, Rivers. A powerful one. She can control the very ice and snow itself. She's dangerous." He spat on the floor, a dark expression crossing his face. "She's the reason my brother is dead." She froze him solid. Dusty lowered his rifle slightly, his mind reeling. A sorceress? Could it be true? He glanced at Crystal, searching for any sign of deception, but her face reflected only confusion and distress. He thought of the ice block, the runes, her visions. It was all starting to fit together, though he didn't like the picture it painted. "He's lying," Crystal whispered, her voice trembling. I don't remember any of this." Bart laughed again, a harsh, grating sound. "Of course she doesn't. Amnesia. Classic. But the power is still there, Rivers. Sleeping, perhaps, but waiting to be awakened. I've heard tales. They say she could freeze a whole town with a flick of her wrist." He turned back to his men. "Keep an eye on her." He turned back to Dusty. "I think we need to have a long talk, Rivers, about what you know and what you're planning to do with our little Ice Queen." The storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest brewing within the cabin. Dusty knew, with a chilling certainty, that his quiet life was over. He had pulled Crystal from the ice, and in doing so, had unleashed a force far greater than he could have ever imagined. And now, with Black Bart in the mix, things were about to get a whole lot colder. A cabin under siege. The air in the cabin thickened, heavy with the unspoken threat hanging between Dusty and Black Bart. Patches growled low in his throat, his eyes never leaving Bart's spurred boots. The outlaw's gaze was fixed on Crystal, a predatory glint sharpening his features. "She's not going anywhere," Dusty said, his voice low and steady, each word measured. He shifted his stance, subtly positioning himself between Crystal and Bart. The fire crackled, the only sound besides the howling wind outside. Bart chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Don't play the hero, old-timer. You don't know who you're protecting. That's the Ice Queen. She cursed my brother, froze him solid. He's still out there, a monument to her magic." Crystal gasped, clutching her head. A flicker of pain crossed her face. I don't understand." Images flashed behind her eyes. Frozen landscapes, swirling snow, a figure encased in ice. The visions were becoming more intense, more frequent. Dusty ignored Bart and knelt beside Crystal. "Easy, easy. Just breathe." He placed a hand on her arm, a gesture of comfort and protection. "Comforting the witch." Bart sneered. "You're a fool. Her magic, it's legendary. Power enough to rule this whole territory. I saw what she could do with my own eyes." He took a step forward, his hand hovering near the pistol holstered at his hip. "I aim to have that power for myself. You won't get it through her," Dusty replied, rising to his full height. His hand instinctively went to the knife sheathed at his belt. He hadn't used it in years, but the muscle memory was still there. "Get out of my cabin, Bart." Bart laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the small space. "You and what army, old man?" He spat on the floor, the spittle sizzling momentarily on a hot ember. "I'm taking her, one way or another. And you're going to help me understand how to use her powers." The air crackled with tension. Dusty knew talking was useless. Bart wasn't here for a conversation. He was here for Crystal. He was here for revenge and power. Dusty had faced men like Bart before, men driven by greed and hate. He knew how these encounters ended. Bart lunged, his hand a blur as he drew his pistol. Dusty reacted instantly, diving to the side, pulling Crystal down with him. The shot rang out, deafening in the confined space, shattering a glass bottle on the shelf behind them. Patches, startled, lunged at Bart, snapping at his boots. Chaos erupted. Crystal scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Dusty rolled, coming up behind the overturned table, using it as cover. He drew his knife, the steel gleaming in the firelight. Bart kicked Patches away, the dog yelping in pain. He aimed another shot, but Dusty was already moving, darting forward, closing the distance. He slashed with the knife, aiming for Bart's gun hand. Bart roared in pain, dropping the pistol. He grabbed his injured hand, blood seeping between his fingers. He stumbled back, his eyes filled with fury. Crystal, caught in the crossfire, felt a searing pain in her head. The flashes intensified, a towering ice castle, robed figures chanting in an unknown language, a young woman with long, silver hair raising her hands, unleashing a torrent of ice. She cried out, clutching her temples. Bart, seeing her distress, lunged again, ignoring his injured hand. He grabbed Crystal by the arm, trying to drag her towards the door. "Come on, witch. You're coming with me." Dusty tackled Bart, knocking him to the floor. They grappled, a tangle of limbs and curses. Dusty landed a blow to Bart's jaw, the outlaw grunting in pain. Crystal, overwhelmed by the visions, felt a strange energy coursing through her veins. The air around her grew colder. Frost began to form on the wooden walls of the cabin. She looked at her hands, her eyes wide with shock. A faint blue light emanated from her fingertips. "Let her go," Dusty roared, struggling to maintain his grip on Bart. Bart, seeing the frost forming, his eyes widened in terror. What's happening? Crystal, lost in the maelstrom of memories and emerging power, didn't hear them. She stared at her hands, mesmerized by the light. The wind howled outside, mirroring the storm raging within her. The cabin, their sanctuary, was now a battleground, a stage for a power she didn't understand, a past she couldn't remember, and a future she couldn't predict. Escape to the mountains. The cabin door disintegrated in a violent burst of timber. Black Bart lurched inside, rage twisting his features, one arm dangling uselessly. Patches, a furious ball of bristling fur and bared fangs, blocked his path to Crystal. "On my way, cur!" Bart bellowed, aiming a punishing kick. Patches yelped, refusing to yield. "Dusty now," Crystal urged, tugging him toward the rear exit. He didn't hesitate, snatching his rifle and sending a hasty shot cracking into the rafters. The reverberating boom gave them the advantage. Dusty propelled Crystal through the back door and into the frigid air, Patches hobbling close behind. A swirling blizzard enveloped them in a disorienting white shroud. "He'll be on our tail," Dusty rasped, his breath forming ephemeral clouds. "We need higher ground." Patches nudged Dusty's hand with his damp nose, a silent plea. "All right, old friend," Dusty conceded, hoisting himself onto the dog's back, then helping Crystal mount behind him. "Hang on tight," he cautioned, spurring Patches onward. Despite his injury, the animal surged forward with surprising power, his robust legs devouring the distance. They plunged into the dense, snow-laden forest, its depths swallowing their passage. Behind them, Bart's furious bellows carried on the wind, followed by the distinct cadence of approaching horses. "He's brought company," Dusty muttered, his expression hardening. He pressed Patches to greater speed, dodging the snow-draped branches. The incline sharpened, the trees crowding closer. The air thinned, biting with icy teeth. Crystal clung to Dusty, her face pressed against his back, a tremor running through her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. I think so," she murmured, her voice muffled by his coat. "I feel different." The relentless pursuit stretched into what seemed like forever. The unyielding chase, the gnawing cold, the ever-present shadow of recapture, each chipped away at Dusty's resolve. A glance back revealed Bart and his posse gaining ground, their mounts sure-footed on the treacherous slopes. Suddenly, Crystal drew in a sharp breath. Dusty stopped. He hauled Patches to a halt, the dog snorting in protest. They stood on a precarious ledge, gazing out over a vast, snow-dusted valley. "What is it?" Dusty questioned, his hand instinctively gripping his rifle. Crystal remained silent, her gaze riveted on the vista below. A soft moan escaped her lips. Then, like a dam bursting, memory surged back. She saw herself, years prior, younger and more resilient, confronting Black Bart and his men. They sought something from her, a prize she refused to surrender. The terror, the desperation, the piercing chill. She recalled it all. She remembered carving runes into the ice, the surge of untamed power, the subsequent oblivion. "It's returning," she breathed, her voice trembling with the force of the revelation. I remember everything." She turned to Dusty, her eyes reflecting a mixture of dread and dawning understanding. "He craved my power, Dusty. He believed he could master it. He intended to utilize it to freeze the entire valley, to claim it as his domain." "What power?" Dusty inquired, his voice hushed. "The power of ice," she declared, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I can wield it, shape it, command it. But I resisted. I couldn't permit him to possess it." She inhaled deeply, the frigid air stinging her lungs. "I froze myself, Dusty. I harnessed my power to encase myself in ice, seeking refuge from him. I believed it was the sole means of safeguarding myself and everyone else." Dusty stared at her, his thoughts racing. The frozen woman he'd discovered, the enigmatic runes, the unsettling visions, it all clicked into place. He knew I remained alive. Crystal continued, her voice filled with urgency. He understood the ice wouldn't confine me indefinitely. That's why he hunted me down. Below, the sounds of Bart and his men intensified, their approach imminent. "We have to move," Dusty stated, his tone resolute. He won't relent until he gets what he desires. He looked at Crystal, her face bathed in the soft glow of the winter sun. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear in his mind. He would not allow Bart to harm her. He would defend her, regardless of the cost. He turned Patches and urged him forward, deeper into the heart of the mountains, leaving Black Bart and the valley behind. Their flight had only just begun. Ice Bridge. The wind shrieked, an unearthly lament that clawed at Dusty's oilskin coat. Frozen needles assaulted his exposed skin, blurring the already treacherous path. He risked a glance back. Black Bart, face twisted into a mask of apoplectic rage, struggled closer. One arm dangled uselessly, a crimson stain blooming against the pristine snow. In his remaining fist, the outlaw clutched his pistol, the steel reflecting the storm's fury. They were cornered. The precarious ledge offered no reprieve. Towering to their left, the cliff face presented an implacable barrier. To their right, the world fell away in a dizzying plunge, a ravine devoured by the tempest. Patches whimpered, favoring an injured leg, yet tirelessly shielded Crystal from the brunt of the gale. Dusty, Crystal's voice, threadbare against the wind's roar, betrayed her terror. "We can't continue." He knew it, that sinking truth. His gaze darted across the chasm, a desperate spark igniting within him. There has to be a crossing. A rasping, guttural sound cut through the storm. Bart's laughter, a promise of pain. "Nowhere left to run, Rivers. The Ice Queen is going to be mine." Dusty drew Crystal close, his hand instinctively finding the comforting weight of his revolver. But he knew, even with his deadly accuracy, he couldn't keep Bart at bay for long. Patches snarled, a defiant rumble in his chest, challenging their pursuer. Crystal's eyes widened, fixated on the swirling vortex of snow. "Dusty, I think I can help." He met her gaze, skepticism warring with fragile hope. "Help how, Crystal?" "Conjure a staircase." "Not a staircase," she corrected, her voice gaining resolve. "A bridge." He tracked her unwavering gaze to the perilous drop. "A bridge? With what?" Her eyes closed, brow furrowed in intense focus. The wind seemed to redouble its efforts, circling her like a spectral guardian. A resonant hum filled the air, vibrating deep within Dusty's bones. He watched, transfixed, as the temperature plunged towards absolute zero. The air crackled, alive with raw power. Then it began. A radiant, unearthly light emanated from Crystal's outstretched palms. The blizzard's fury answered her call. The swirling snow coalesced, densifying, hardening into something new. A shimmering arc of ice, translucent and pulsing with an inner cerulean light, began to materialize, reaching across the chasm towards the opposing precipice. Dusty could only stare, dumbstruck by the impossible spectacle. The icy bridge expanded rapidly, spanning the void with miraculous speed. He felt the encroaching cold, a penetrating chill that felt pure. Bart, momentarily robbed of his malice, could only gape at the unfolding phenomenon, his pistol forgotten, slack-jawed. "Hurry, Dusty." Crystal's voice was strained, face ashen. "It won't endure." He didn't hesitate. He hoisted Crystal onto his back, Patches' plaintive whines echoing behind him. One careful step at a time, Dusty cautiously ventured onto the newly formed ice bridge. It felt surprisingly firm beneath his weight, defying its delicate appearance. The wind continued its assault, but a strange calm settled around them, a pocket of serenity. They were halfway across when Bart snapped, the spell broken. He raised his pistol, aiming with deadly intent at Crystal. "I won't let you escape me," he bellowed, his voice thick with venom. He fired. The bullet sliced past Dusty's ear, narrowly missing its intended target. He faltered, losing precious purchase on the slick surface. Patches yelped, scrambling for equilibrium. Bart, emboldened by their near fall, pressed forward onto the shimmering span. The ice protested under his weight, groaning ominously. "Crystal now!" Dusty roared the command. Crystal's eyes snapped open, her gaze hardening into glacial resolve. A wave of profound cold radiated outwards, enveloping the bridge. The ice beneath Bart's boots transformed into a treacherous, glassy plain. He slipped, flailing wildly, his good arm grasping uselessly at the empty air. A strangled scream escaped his lips as he lost all purchase, his feet sliding out from beneath him. He plummeted into the abyss. Dusty watched, heart hammering against his ribs, as Bart's form vanished into the swirling white void below. The storm swallowed his final cry. He didn't pause. With newfound resolve, he urged Patches forward, legs burning, lungs aching. They reached solid ground on the other side, collapsing in exhausted heaps, sucking in ragged breaths. Crystal slid from Dusty's back, her legs trembling violently. She gazed back at the dissolving ice bridge, her expression a mixture of wonder and trepidation. The construct, its purpose fulfilled, began to shatter and dissipate, the ethereal ice melting back into the raging blizzard. Dusty watched it disappear, the import of what he had just witnessed sinking deep into his bones. The prison had fallen, but a new and perilous chapter had commenced. He looked at Crystal, her face illuminated by the fading afterglow of her power. An uneasy feeling washed over him, a thawing heart. A mournful keen ripped through the air as they made their way back to the cabin, Crystal shivering despite the blanket Dusty had wrapped around her. The adrenaline crash left her weak and foreshadowed grim possibilities. Bart's absence was a gaping wound, a before and after dividing her world. "You holding up?" Dusty asked, his voice raspy with worry, his eyes fixed on the faint cerulean luminescence still ghosting her fingertips. Crystal offered a wan smile. "Better. Stranger, too." Wielding the ice felt intuitive, as if a long-dormant memory had stirred. "But it's also exhausting." Understanding dawned in Dusty's gaze. "We need answers, Crystal, about you and this gift." The cabin was a meager refuge from the wind's icy teeth. Dusty coaxed the fire to life. Dancing flames battled back the gloom, a tangible comfort. Crystal watched him, a pensive expression clouding her features. "Dusty," she began, her voice hesitant, "I glimpsed visions when I made the bridge. A sprawling, glacial expanse, a city carved from ice, and glyphs, symbols unknown, yet achingly familiar." He set down the spoon, his eyes locking onto hers. "Glyphs? Like those on the ice block?" She nodded. "I think they're part of me. Maybe they hold the key to who I am." The ensuing days dissolved into a whirlwind of research and hesitant forays into the surrounding wilderness. Dusty immersed himself in his library, hunting for any mention of frost magic, glacial metropolises, or the enigmatic runes. Crystal, meanwhile, found herself drawn by an unseen tether into the stark landscape around the cabin. Returning one afternoon from a fruitless search, Dusty found Crystal standing motionless in the clearing, arms raised. The air around her thrummed with a faint, otherworldly glow. He froze, his pulse hammering against his ribs. "Crystal, what are you doing?" he managed, his voice a strained whisper. She remained unresponsive, eyes shut, face serene. Then a miracle unfolded. The arid earth surrendered, yielding to tiny emerald shoots that pierced the surface. A skeletal bush exploded with vibrant blossoms, its branches weighed down with color. The air filled with the heady perfume of wildflowers, a welcome balm against the iron tang of the snow. Crystal lowered her arms, her eyes fluttering open. She gasped, her gaze sweeping over the revitalized terrain. I didn't know this was possible," she breathed, her voice thick with wonder. The clearing was now a sanctuary, a pocket of life amidst the desolate expanse. A stream, once a solid ribbon of ice, now babbled cheerfully, its waters pristine. Birds chirped joyous melodies from the newly adorned trees. Dusty approached slowly, his eyes wide with awe. You breathed life back into this place." She turned to him, her face alight. It felt correct, like repaying a debt. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands. Her skin was cool, yet her gaze burned with a warmth that began to melt the permafrost around his heart. "You're extraordinary, Crystal," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. She leaned into his touch, her eyes searching his. "So are you, Dusty. You rescued me. You gave me hope again." He lowered his head and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of gratitude, admiration, and a love born in the most unlikely of settings. The kiss deepened, a silent pledge of protection, devotion, and a shared destiny. When they parted, Dusty knew he was irrevocably lost. He'd spent his life adrift, searching for an undefinable something. Now, standing in this vibrant oasis, with Crystal in his arms, he understood. He had discovered love, a reason to embrace the impossible, and a purpose. He would shield her whatever the cost. He would decipher the mysteries of her past, and together, they would face the unknown. He had sought solace in this frozen wasteland, but instead, he had found a thawing heart and a love blooming in the snow.